Evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. It looks like we've got a few folks still trickling in here. So we'll give everybody a few minutes to get settled in, and we'll begin the presentation shortly. Thank you. Well, thank you all very much for joining us this evening. You'll be hearing from myself, Ryan Mingus, the Managing Director here at TUSK Partners, and my esteemed colleague, Josh Swearingen, Director of Mergers and Acquisitions here at TUSK Partners. We couldn't be more excited to be here tonight and chat through a very hot topic in the DSO world right now, and that is specialty dentistry. And all of that is specialty dentistry. Our agenda for the night here is on the screen, and we're going to start with a brief overview of TUSK Partners, who we are and what our process is. We have been in business for over 7 years now and really do have a tried and true process. So we want to make sure for those of you that aren't familiar with who we are and how we operate, that you've got a good understanding of the folks that work here at TUSK and how we go about representing our clients in the market. We're then going to go through a history lesson and talk about the rise of the specialty DSO. And then we're going to discuss the specialty DSO landscape, so give you an update on that, and discuss some of the market economic impacting specialty DSOs to date. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with considerations for groups and doctors that are considering a sale to a specialty DSO anytime in the near future. One point of housekeeping, there is a chat box that's available here for Q&A. We will do our best to get through the questions at the end of today's presentation, but if we don't get to those questions tonight, we will follow up via email within 24 hours. But thank you all for your time and consideration and providing questions to us. All right, with that, we're going to give you a brief overview of TUSK Partners. As I mentioned before, we've been in business for 7 years now and are really proud of the group that we've established here and all of the service that we've provided our clients over the years. So we're actually going to touch on some of our experience within the specialty space on a future slide. As I mentioned before, I'll be hosting today's webinar. I'm the Managing Director here at TUSK Partners. I've been in the field of healthcare, either in a strategic consulting capacity, business development capacity, or mergers and acquisition capacity my entire professional career, starting with Johnson & Johnson in the medical device field, and most recently here at TUSK for the last 3 years. And I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Josh Swearingen, and I'll let him talk about his background.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. I really appreciate it. It's really great to be here. I enjoy this topic tremendously and love having an opportunity to just speak to people about the M&A markets in general. I've had the opportunity to be in dentistry for going on 20 years now. I started in the distribution space and quickly moved into the DSO group practice development market. I've had the opportunity to work for a couple of local regional DSOs, one of which I was able to successfully take to market and sell off to a national DSO. I did a couple of years with American Dental Partners, which is a national DSO on their M&A team, and then had a chance come up to work with TUSK Partners, and it was a dream come true, and have been here for the last year and a half and absolutely love it. So thrilled to be here tonight. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, Josh, just a shout out to you. You came in and hit the ground running. We loaded up your plate pretty fast and had a pretty feverish first 12 months on the job. So glad to see you're settled in and actually have a little bit more of a work-life balance these days.
Well, I appreciate that. It is a fantastic opportunity, and I love working here. So the long hours are more than worth it.
So folks, this is a few of the other members of our team. The majority of our team, who just a quick shout out, who's not on this page, is our marketing team. That's Mariana and Austin. They do a wonderful job putting on webinars like this and all the other amazing marketing efforts and educational and business development efforts that we have here at TUSK. So quick shout out to them. But at the top of this slide here, we've got Kevin Cumbus. He's our founder and president here at TUSK Partners. He's actually the son of a pediatric dentist. So specialty dentistry runs through our blood here at TUSK from the top down. Next, we've got the business development team, Maggie, Jarrett, and Alex Malone. Both joined TUSK in the last 2 years and have been absolutely wonderful for us in onboarding new clients. We have a lot of different access points for clients, trade shows, webinars, inbound phone calls, you name it. And there are a lot of folks that need to be followed up with, and they do a tremendous job in getting back to all of those groups and individual doctors alike to make sure that they have a full understanding of what TUSK can offer, and then ultimately getting them onboarded here and handed over to our mergers and acquisitions and analytics team. Mergers and acquisitions section here, we've got Kevin Sauer. He's another director of M&A here at TUSK Partners. He, kind of like Josh, has spent all of his professional career in the dental field. So he actually started his career at Pacific Dental Services and worked for a number of DSOs and other dental organizations throughout his career, and came to TUSK most recently from Platinum Dental Services that has a group between Utah and Colorado. And he served as a COO there, and he joined us about 2 years ago as well. Our most recent hire within the mergers and acquisitions team is Yazin Abusad. He came to TUSK from an investment bank where he served as a generalist, but did have a number of healthcare transactions under his belt, and found his way into the dental world. And we couldn't be happier for him to be on our team. And he, like Josh, has really hit the ground running for us, and has a handful of deals on his plate in the very short time that he's been here. Finally, we've got our analytics team. This is really, the gasoline to our engine. I think it's one of the biggest differentiators for TUSK Partners in that we have all of our own analytics team in-house. These are the folks that make our clients look amazing when we go to market, and ultimately are there to defend the offers that we receive, and ultimately at the quality of earnings are there shoulder to shoulder with our client, making sure that the valuations that we negotiated on the mergers and acquisitions team at the LOI phase get pulled all the way through to the closing table. Couldn't be happier with the team that we have here. And those of you that ever get a chance to work with TUSK, I think that it will be one of the biggest takeaways is the amount of energy and effort that these folks have to put in preparing deals to go to market and ultimately getting them to close. This is a great illustration of TUSK's experience. On the left side, you've got all of the finance, investment banking, private equity, and M&A organizations that our team has worked for over our careers. And on the right, you've got all of the dental, DSO, and or healthcare organizations that we have worked for over our careers. And we really do marry all of these experiences together in order to provide a lot of different perspectives for our clients, a lot of different perspectives for the buy side, and really feel that this adds the best amount of value to our clients because we have the ability to frame their business in the best possible light and articulate their value proposition to make sure that the buy side fully understands how that particular group or practice is going to fit into their organization from a strategic standpoint, from a financial standpoint, and from a clinical standpoint. And I truly believe that our backgrounds allow us to paint those pictures for the buy side. Next, I want to make sure that everybody on the call that isn't entirely familiar with what TUSK does sees an illustration of our process. We run a formal marketed sales process for every single one of our clients. It's customizable and depends on the needs of the specific client, the timeline that they need to achieve a partnership or a transaction. Obviously, the longer that we have, the better. However, we can, in certain circumstances, still run very efficient, very effective processes in a condensed timeline. So this is directional in nature, but in probably where 85% of our clients end up living is within this time frame that's outlined here. It all starts with the analytics on the preparation phase. So the first two columns here are really about preparing your business to go to market from a financial standpoint. Our analytics team will rebuild your financials analysis, your financial statements from the general ledger up, and find every single penny of add back to ensure that the EBITDA that we take to market is putting your best foot forward and giving you the best chance at maximum valuation. We absolutely tie every single add back we make back to the general ledger, which creates confidence on the buy side that we are incredibly diligent with every single add back that we're taking, and that an acceptance from a QV firm is going to be quite likely. Next, we work on the marketing material. We build SIMs, tear sheets, etc., and those items live in our virtual data room for the buy side. We collaborate with our clients on this, and again, this is where we get to pull from our experience from all of the different organizations that we've worked in to bring our past experiences to light at this phase to again paint our clients' business in the best possible light. Next, we're actually in market, and we're taking buy side phone calls, entertaining first round bids, giving guidance to the buy side, narrowing down the pool, and getting second round and third round bids from the top few buyers for our clients. We are managing all of those phone calls, all of those Zoom calls, the on-person coordination of site visits and dinners, etc. All that is being done and coordinated through TUSK. Finally, we would get to a signed LOI and enter into the closing process, where our analytics team comes back to the forefront to ensure that the quality of earnings process goes smoothly and the transaction value that is agreed upon in the LOI survives that quality of earnings. Additionally, we're providing white glove service throughout the closing process from a legal standpoint as well. Although we're not attorneys, we do actively quarterback the attorney on both sides to make sure that we're moving documents forward in a timely manner, and all the business terms that we negotiated get memorialized appropriately in the legal docs. Quick overview of us by the numbers: 13 team members, 50 plus years of investment banking, M&A, and private equity experience. And to date, we've closed over $780 million worth of dental deals. And a large number of those have been in the field of specialty. So that bears to tonight's topic. So getting into the heart of the matter tonight is the rise of the specialty DSO. So we're going to have a little bit of a history lesson here. Specialty practices and groups were all but ignored by DSOs in the dental market for many years. But in recent years, we've seen a new wave of specialty specific DSOs that have hit the market. These groups have partnered with some of the smartest private equity groups with the deepest track records within dental. However, their experience in dental was specific to GP, and they have since formed investment theses around specialty platforms. And as a result of that, there are more buyers than ever for specialty DSOs because there are specific DSOs designed for each individual specialty. And then there is another wave of DSOs that are focused on one or two or even three specific specialties that, the trifecta, if you will, the buzzword that we've heard going around with pedo, ortho, and oral surgery. So that's where things have gone historically. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh and let him actually go through a really interesting illustration of the rise of the specialty DSO.
Awesome, great. Thank you, Ryan. It's really interesting when you start thinking about kind of the dawn of DSOs in the space. And if you look back into kind of the early 90s, it was really largely dominated by GP-centric groups. And obviously you've got huge names in front of you right now. Those names were smaller, 30 years ago, but back in the day, those were the consolidators. And with one exception, all of them are still around today. And that one exception is Orthodontic Centers of America, otherwise known as OCA. And it's an interesting case study. And if you're actually looking for details on the case study, Brian Kaleo from Dykema wrote a really interesting article about OCA probably 6 or 7 years ago. You can look it up online and find it pretty easily. But Orthodontic Centers of America was really, to my knowledge, the first specialty-centric DSO that was formed and created. And without getting into too many details, it epically failed and crashed and burned in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And there was a stream of litigation that followed that from previous owners and shareholders and things like that, that really painted the specialty space, specifically from a DSO standpoint, in somewhat of a negative light. And if you look back over history, specialty DSOs remained largely dormant post Orthodontic Centers of America for roughly 10 or 15 years, while GP-centric DSOs continued to thrive. And if you fast forward those 10 or 15 years to right around 2015, you saw Smile Doctors was formed. And then subsequently, over the next 3 or 4 years, essentially all of the specialties were represented by their own specialty-centric DSO. And that brings us up to roughly 2020 COVID time period. And then after COVID hit, it was, this is when we really saw the acceleration hit. And it's largely because there was so much pent up demand and need and referrals for specialists. The specialty market rebounded after COVID almost instantly. And balance sheets looked immediately better, performance was good, and we saw PE begin to really start taking a long, hard look at these specialty DSOs that were already formed and then were forming subsequently as a result of that. And we saw, I don't know, a 5 or a 6-fold increase in the number of specialty-centric DSOs that were available in the market. And you began to see not just, a specialty DSO for an ortho company and for an endo company and a perio and, et cetera. You saw them starting to cross over and have multi-specialty groups that really tried to capture all of the referrals from the patient base and serve all the patients in that regard. And then as as kind of a side note to that, you also began to see some of the GP-centric groups begin to dip their toes into the specialty space as well and look to hire either traveling specialists. Some of them were looking at acquiring specialty groups to help service their existing arsenal of GP practices. And some of them were looking at building out entire divisions specifically for specialty. So really over the last 3 years is when we've seen really, really significant growth in the specialty side of the DSO business and consolidation in particular. And I think that we don't foresee that slowing down at all because there's tremendous pent up supply at this point.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see this slide and see that progression, and then how Orthodontic Centers of America might have delayed, I guess, the excitement around the specialty DSO. That's what, 15 plus years passed from the time that Orthodontic Centers of America failed to the time that Smile Doctors, which is arguably the first specialty specific DSO that really got a lot of traction. That's a really long time to pass. So I imagine it certainly scarred a number of people in the industry.
Well, it's funny. I remember when I first got into dentistry, it was with a company that was subsequently acquired by Henry Schein, but it was with a small orthodontic company, and the lawsuits were actually occurring around about the time that I started in the industry. And I remember hearing conversation going on about how, and no offense to any of our listeners tonight, but, orthodontists were difficult to work with in the dental service organization space, and people didn't want to have to deal with specialists because they were demanding, and it was just a different expectation, and the DSOs couldn't figure out how to service those expectations. So yeah, I think OCA was a kind of a line in the sand for some of the PE groups interested in getting into the specialty space, and they took one look at it and immediately shied away. And again, that's why you saw that delay between OCA and Smile Doctors.
Yeah. I know we're going to talk about factors that are driving the growth of the specialty DSO in subsequent slides, but I do, because this is more of like a timeline slide, I do want to call out what I feel just one instance of why specialty DSOs grew that are not covered in subsequent slides, and that's COVID and the timing of COVID, whereby you've got these, in 2010, the rise of the specialty DSO, where you've got, roughly one per specialty, and probably a lot of folks in the lab getting approval to go out and build specialty DSOs that are going to subsequently compete with US Endo, D4C, Endo 1, USOSM, and Smile Docs. However, right when they're about to launch, or maybe right after they secured their very first platform, I'm thinking, Beacon Oral Surgery from Blue Sea, they got their first cluster of practices just before COVID. And then COVID hits, and specialty DSO, specialty practices at the solo level or small group level, pre-partnership level, come out of the gate swinging. They were allowed to take emergency cases, so their financial position was just much stronger than GP. So it's kind of also a perfect storm where, one, you've got a whole lot of new entrants into the marketplace that were ready before COVID actually hit. Some of them even got started before COVID hit. And then COVID happens, and specialty DSOs are just performing a whole lot better than GPs. And I look back on TUSK's closed deals in 2021, and it was 75% specialty, which is very unique for us as an organization. And this year, I think we're going to be roughly, forecasted to do 70% GP, which is more in line. But 2021 was a huge anomaly, and it largely had to do with just the fact of the timing of when COVID hit and when all these new DSOs were planning on coming to the market already. And then the speed at which specialty recovered allowed for this. And it also created a whole lot more heartburn for these specialty doctors to experience COVID, and ultimately perhaps entertain the idea of partnership, where if COVID had never happened, they might have been more averse to it. So I do think it's interesting that how COVID could have played into the timing and the speed at which specialty started consolidating. So this is some great news. So of those groups that did get to start in, called the 2010s, you had a few of them go through some recaps. Specialty Dental Brands, US Oral Surgery, Paradigm Oral Surgery. We've got Dental Care Alliance up here because they've got a very concerted effort in the specialty front. Historically, they've been more geared towards acquiring GP practices and integrating specialists throughout them. However, in recent years, they've made a very deep effort in trying to acquire specialty-specific practices and groups even to continue to grow their organization. But we always love to hear news of a recapitalization. It's great for the industry, and usually it's just a big wave of tailwind for everybody in the industry, and we all get to listen in on the stories and hear about everybody's returns that they were able to achieve. So now that you've gotten that first round of these full specialty specific or even multi-specialty groups recapping, it's starting to give validity to those platforms. Whereas, in GP, you've got a ton of different groups that you can point to that have been through multiple recapitalization events. So to us, this just gives, confidence in the industry around the direction of specialty DSOs and their future in our industry. MB2 is also in here. They've been known to acquire a lot of specialty practices as well, and they had a recap in early 2021. These are some examples of specialty transactions from TUSK partners, totaling about $500 million of enterprise value. Just thank you to all of our clients that might be on the call today that are on this board. And if you're not, I'm sorry we didn't make it. The slide was only so big, and we wanted to make sure we gave a great illustration to those listening. But our experience in the space is vast. We've had the luxury of working with a number of large specialty groups that actually formed entirely new DSOs. Spark Orthodontics, for example, on this slide, it was a large 10-location orthodontic group CEO'd and founded by Jason Hartman. And we represented him in his partnership with Rock Mountain Capital. And since that partnership, they've been an active acquirer in the space. And there have been quite a few others where we've had the opportunity to create new platforms in the specialty space, which is really great and gives us a lot of pride to start a DSO and then ultimately have them acquire one of our subsequent clients. It always makes for good storytelling. Okay, now we're going to go through the specialty update. We're going to discuss some of the factors that are driving consolidation within the specialty space. We already discussed COVID, but we're going to go deeper into a few other trends that we feel are largely contributing to the speed at which specialty is consolidating. And from there, we're also going to discuss where specialty is today relative to GP regarding percentage consolidated.
Awesome, thanks, Ryan. So I think as a brief disclaimer, data surrounding the exact level of consolidation within the market space, either on the specialty side or the general dental side, is a little bit sparse. It's largely collected from manufacturers and distributors and questionnaires that are returned by many of you. So it's not entirely a scientific method, to say the least, but we can get some relatively broad generalizations by compiling all the data and averaging it all out. So I think these are reasonably close. In my opinion, they may be a little bit light, but reasonably close to where we are today. So if you look at, and this is for both general practitioners and specialty, these percentages. So if you look at the private practice market space, estimates have us tagged at about 75% of the market still being a single location, one, maybe two doctor private practice, which is really still at the front end of the consolidation curve for most industries. And if you move over to the next section, 2 to 25 locations, which we would consider to be the mid-market range, you're looking at roughly 13%, and then the elite groups, which are kind of your larger regional groups, or certainly your national groups, 25 plus locations, that represents around 12% of the market. And that's roughly where we stand today. So if we look out over the next 5 years, our expectations are that it will continue to consolidate relatively quickly within the space. And Ryan, you can switch slides. As we look out over the next 5 years, we anticipate that those private practice locations are probably going to move from around 75% to roughly 60% of the market space. And I would say it's probably going to be closer to 50 to 60% over the next 5 years. And then if you flip to the other side of that diagram, roughly 15% of the marketplace will reside within the larger group practice range, those 25 plus locations within the elite groups. But I think really the most interesting part of this slide is where the consolidation is happening the fastest, and that's really in that center middle market range, those 2 to 25 locations. And a lot of those are, regional DSOs that are popping up, that are aggregating practices in an attempt to really compete with the larger national DSOs. And the interesting thing about that is we actually saw this in medical probably 15 or 20 years ago, when medical was still in the process of consolidating. It's now 80 to 90, probably 90% consolidated. But we saw this about 15 to 20 years ago within the medical space, where you had a time period, and it was kind of the golden period for private practices of about 10 years, where private practices were fetching really high multiples and were highly valuable, and everybody was pursuing them. Both that middle tier and the elite level groups were pursuing private practices to add to their arsenal of locations. And then at some point, and I would anticipate within dentistry, it's probably not the next 5 years, it's probably 6+ years out. At some point, those private practices weren't large enough to really move the needle for the elite level groups. And the elite level groups really started focusing on larger acquisitions. So they essentially discounted the smaller private practices, and they started eating up those mid-market 2 to 25 location groups, because that could actually help them achieve the growth targets that their investment committees had put in front of them, annually or over the course of, 3 to 5 years. And the result of that is you started to see all of the premiums that the private practices had demanded for, 10 or 15 years started to move over into that mid-market space. And it was much harder to find a buyer for those private practices. And I think that we will eventually see that in dentistry once we get, a little bit further down the road, maybe 5, 10 more, 6, 7, 8 more years down the road. We'll start to see some of that discounting occur on the private practices, and all the premiums will be paid on the mid-market. But I think an even greater warning is, if you look at the medical space, when that started to happen, you started to see the consolidation speed up, because the larger groups were biting off larger and larger chunks, which further differentiated some of the business efficiencies that already existed. And it caused a lot of those private practices to really struggle. And it essentially got to the point where there was a large number of private practices in the medical space that either had to sell at a significant discount if they could even find a buyer, or they just closed their practices and went and worked for, one of the universities or hospital groups that now owned all the practices in the marketplace. So I don't think we're certainly not there yet. We're several years away from that. But I think if you're looking at comparing markets and trying to find some of the leading indicators, I think that's what we're going to see 6 to 10 years down the road. And it's something to be aware of, especially if you're one of those private practice owners, looking for an ideal exit scenario. And, when you compare these to specialty, it's very much a similar trajectory. I think that you've got a much smaller percentage of the market that's consolidated at this point, but it's growing so rapidly, we're going to begin to see some of the same things. And as you get into the referral networks that are being developed, I think you're going to have a point where some of those private practices that have held out are going to have a hard time competing, because the referral networks are captured by the larger groups that are out there. So,
yeah, I think that's a great segue into the next slide. But I do want to fully agree with what you're saying with the parallels. When I first came to dental, I was in the management consulting world with hospitals, and my focus was ambulatory surgery centers. And it was much further along in its consolidation, and the acquirers ultimately mostly ended up being hospital systems, but they started with private equity backed groups that were out there, but due to various regulations and Stark and anti-kickback statutes, these businesses became so valuable that new doctors couldn't afford to buy into them, which is something that we're starting to see a lot in the specialty space, where we've got folks that come to us and they've got a very large, successful specialty practice, and they understand the value of their business because they've worked with a group like TUSK or been approached by a DSO, and an offer's been put on the table that they didn't accept, and because they wanted to continue on with their historical model. But once they see that number and they see the valuation that their practice could bring, and then they present that to an associate that they might want to become a partner, that those associates don't really have the ability to buy in. So I certainly am seeing that parallel from the ambulatory surgery center space in our specialty space. But on your note of sort of the referral network, I think that was a great segue to this slide.
Well, thank you. I do my best. I think it's interesting, and over the next couple of slides, you're actually going to see a few different reasons why specialty is moving so fast. But I think from my perspective, there are two primary reasons, and I'll go through one of them right now. Really, it's control of the referral network. And as a specialist, for those of you specialists that are on this call, obviously you're fully aware that the traditional method of building out a business was building out your specialty practice that was reasonably within close proximity to 4, 5, 6, 8 solid referring dentists. You spend most of your marketing dollars are entertainment for those referring dentists, and you communicate well with them. They refer you patients, you buy them cookies, and everybody is thrilled and happy with the outcome. And you can operate that way, and many of you have operated that way for a very, very long time, very, very successfully, and built amazing businesses. And that's fantastic. And I think that what has changed is we are now seeing that referral network begin to degrade. And you've got a few different reasons for that. You've got DSOs that are devouring general practices left and right, and are doing their best to capture as much revenue as possible. So if you're a large DSO and you buy 3 or 4 good-sized practices in a market, you know that those practices are referring out a significant amount of revenue. So your goal is going to be to capture that revenue. And once you own the practice, it's kind of an undiscussed fact, but you can to some extent influence where some of those referrals go. And if you have in-house specialists, you certainly want to keep those patients in-house. The other side of this is your direct patient marketing. And I think we saw this most clearly in the ortho space. And ortho had seen some degradation for a little while from general dentists doing Invisalign and straight wire and things like that. But I think where their eyes were really opened were when places like Smile Direct Club and some of the other players out there started opening up basically freestanding shops, scanning patients, and handling that patient interaction almost entirely on their own, with under the supervision of a general dentist or a specialist who is reviewing the cases, but without an actual specialist on site meeting with the patient. And I think when you step back and you look at business models and you start thinking about the complexities that specialists face, they've not had to deal with that sort of pillaging of their referral sources in the past. And that has led many of those smarter specialists to rethink what the future might look like and how to maximize value from their business moving forward.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. I think we're going to cover a couple, a little bit of the direct to consumer on this slide as well.
Yeah. All right. So why do we believe it's moving so fast? Well, I think there are a couple of different sides of this. Part of it's procedural, and then part of it is financial. And Ryan has one of my favorite sayings, the anatomical turf battle, which obviously I take no credit for. That's entirely his. I had never heard that previously, but I think that when you start looking at specialty procedures, you have a larger and larger number of hands that are trying to capture that revenue and are not at all worried about whether a specialist does some of that work or a general practitioner does some of that work. And Ryan, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this if you want to expound a little bit.
Yeah, I think, it's really interesting to see the advancements in technology and what that's ultimately doing to dentistry. I've seen it in other specialty, in other forms of healthcare. When I worked in the ambulatory surgery center space, it was spine procedures, where historically orthopedic spine surgeons were the only folks that were doing those types of invasive procedures around discectomies and things like that. But as technology continued to advance and micro discectomies became a form of treatment, now you've got neurologists, you've got pain management doctors, all feeling as though that they're comfortable and capable of performing these procedures. And you're seeing that in the dental world with implants specifically. We feel that in a lot of our practices that we're evaluating, implants become a greater and greater portion of the makeup of the procedures. And 5-10 years ago, that was definitely not the case. So we're starting to see these more advanced procedures, in the implant space be performed by general dentists, periodontists, prosthodontists. Not that prosthodontists weren't doing it before, but I think there's certainly a shift towards the implant as 3D printed guides become available, as imaging becomes better, courses become more readily available to folks. There are folks out there that are have taken the name implantologist because that's largely their focus. They've got a passion for it. They've developed the skill set, and they've planted their stake in the ground that's how that they want to choose. They've chosen to practice dentistry. So we're starting to see that. And then we're also seeing, a lot of DSOs moving from, maybe a DSO that had a lot of dentures in there. Well, in order to address the modern consumer, they're pushing to have more all on fours and more implant focused procedures that cater to the modern consumer that might be averse to the concept of dentures. So there's just a lot of activity in the implant space at the GP level, and even it impacting the oral surgery space as well. So it's been pretty interesting to watch and get to learn a bit about that. And then you've also got orthos. Josh had talked about direct to consumer with Smile Direct Club, Candid, etc. So that has been part of it. You've also got general dentists that are adopting this technology in their practices because, again, they've developed that skill set, they've developed that muscle. The technology is incredibly advanced, and patients are asking for it in the chair. So they've since offered that as a revenue source within their organization. And then it even goes into, you've got airway and breathing and sleep apnea, and just orthodontics has evolved much more from being primarily for teenagers to being for adults and comprehensive healthcare, dental care as well. DSOs have the greatest purchasing power, so a lot of these DSOs, when it comes to aligners, they're very expensive, and they've got the ability to negotiate favorable lab fees from the aligner companies, which benefits the selling doctors if they end up going with a joint venture type model where they get to share in the profits on a go forward basis. They get the benefit from the purchasing power of these DSOs. We've even seen one DSO start their own aligner, which is incredible. You have to have a tremendous amount of R&D funding to do that. So definitely nothing I've ever seen before in the space, but really interesting, and excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, I actually think you just hit on a really interesting point from two different perspectives. So I'll try to cover both of them here real quickly. I think on the procedural front, we're now in a situation where your standard equipment for a specialty office, and really in many respects for most general practitioner offices, is a cone beam, and many of them have 3D printers, and I'd say a large percentage of them have intraoral scanners, and a lot of them have milling machines and things like that. All very expensive equipment, which that will play in the second half of my comment. But for the first half, what that does is it really does allow for a lot of that treatment of various services or procedures by different providers. So I think one of the reasons that you're seeing general practitioners picking off implants and endo and all of these other ortho, all these other services, are because technology has made a lot of those services far easier and more efficient to do. And from a DSO standpoint, a DSO is more than comfortable making a capital investment in a practice if they know that that general practitioner can then capture all of that additional revenue. And I think you're seeing them get very aggressive about making sure that their general dentists are trained, making sure that they have the right technology and equipment, and doing everything that they can to ensure that they keep those patients in-house as often as possible. And I think that crosses over into, all of the specialties as well, allowing a lot of the specialists to cross-provide services as well. So I think that's one side of it. On the other side of my comment, when you're looking at, Ryan touched on this briefly earlier, but when you're thinking about residents that are coming out of school, or, theoretically the associate that you might hand your practice off to or sell your practice to at some point down the road, a lot of those residents or a lot of those doctors are coming out of school with, a tremendous amount of debt, an unbelievable astronomical amount of debt that they have to service almost immediately. So that in itself is a limiter. But when you consider the cost of making sure that a practice is up to speed and on par technologically, and whether that's building out a new space and putting all of that technology in there, or buying an older orthodontist practice and making sure that it has the technology that's necessary to do the service, to provide the services to the patients that you want to, it becomes almost overwhelming for those not students, I guess, but for those doctors, and to the point where many of them would have trouble getting any sort of funding or financing for that anyway. So that has its own limiting effect. And I think when I was thinking about this presentation, I think what I think is really interesting is we are really quickly within the specialty space. And I think this is one of the biggest reasons why we're seeing consolidation increase so fast on the specialty side. We're very quickly getting to the point in the specialty space where we were probably 15 years ago in the general dental space. And that was a point where the residents that were coming out of dental school, they were starting to query all of them as they were leaving, asking them what they wanted to do with their life, where they were planning on going. And we saw a shift about 15 years ago where most of those residents didn't really have any desire to own their own private practice. And they understood coming out of school that they were probably going to work for a corporation. They were probably going to work for, a large group practice or something to that effect. And I think that availability of doctors is the biggest hurdle for most of the DSOs out in the space. And for general dentistry, that consolidation really started taking off when that mentality shift occurred. And all of a sudden we have ready access to doctors coming out of school that already understand that they're going to be working for a corporation. So then it just comes down to which one's the best one to work for and where do I want to live geographically. I think that switch is starting to happen in specialty, where you're starting to get a larger and larger percentage of specialists who are graduating, coming out. They are realizing all of the factors we've just talked about. So they're realizing the cost of capital is high, the cost of the equipment is high, the cost of their school is high, they have a potentially degrading referral base, they have a general dental DSO right down the street that they could potentially be competing against at some point. And if they do set up a practice and they have a really good referral network in place, there's no guarantee that those referring doctors aren't going to be purchased by a DSO at some point in the very near future. And I think many of them are beginning to step back and say, I can have a really, really good quality of life working 3.5 days a week as a specialist for a DSO who will provide me more referrals than I know how to handle or can deal with, and my quality of life will be better. And that availability of doctors or specialists is music to the ears of these specialty DSOs, because that is their number one challenge. So as long as they know they have a steady flow of oral surgeons, periodontists, orthodontists, pediatric dentists, et cetera, coming out of the schools, they will continue consolidating, they will continue buying, they will continue forming, and they will grow as fast as there are doctors to fill those spots.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think all of the things on this slide, along with the timing of COVID, and then with the timing of all of these newly formed specialty DSOs in late 2019, just really created the perfect storm for incredibly fast consolidation, 2021, 2022, and even in 2023, we've already closed 5 deals, and soon to be 7 this quarter. And many of those are specialty. It just has created a perfect storm that has driven the consolidation of specialty much faster than in the GP space. And then given the specialty space is just smaller, there are less boxes in general and less providers. I think that percentage consolidation is going to be greater in the specialty space in 2 years than it is in the general dentistry space. That's my take on things. But
completely agree.
Really interesting points on this slide here that are kind of macro and micro elements that are driving this consolidation. But great points to consider.
Yep.
Well, takeaways for doctors and groups on the call tonight. We certainly want to have a call to action for everybody here and some takeaways. But I think we've covered it. Specialty is consolidating faster than we expected when it first came about in 2010 with the proliferation of Smile Docs and US Endo and US OSM, et cetera. Newly formed groups that have a track record of success. You got Shore Capital, Blue Sea, Thurston. Many of these groups are backing a specialty platform, and they'd already had success in the general dentistry space. So they've got the pedigree, they've got the track record, and they're ready to move fast and with conviction versus maybe the first time that they got into the dental space where they were getting their legs underneath them. Groups that have experience in the space can really move much faster.
Yeah, Ryan, I think this underlies kind of an important point. I think that anytime, and for all intents and purposes, we're still relatively early on. As fast as it's accelerating in the specialty space, we're still reasonably early on in that consolidation. And I think that anytime you're early on in a phase like this, you're going to see a lot of money come to the table. And I think that one of the key points of this presentation, what we really want to communicate is, there's a lot of opportunity out there. There's some really great opportunities. There's some less than great opportunities. And I think making sure that you understand not just the group that you're potentially looking at, but the funding source behind it, what their track record is, who's running the organization, and all of those various intricacies is critically important, especially if you're considering going down this path.
Yeah, well said. As a result of this, a lot of these groups coming to the table, there are more choices than ever in the specialty space, and the pace is moving faster than we saw in GP. If you're an endo platform, large group practice today, looking for a partnership, what exists to you is infinite, with respect to doing an endo specific platform, doing a multi-specialty platform, partnering with a general dentistry platform that overlaps your position and what that might do to your organization. And then how is your deal structured that allows you to maximize that if you were to go down the path of partnering with a general dentistry practice? You don't want to just partner with a general dentistry practice because it's going to potentially produce more patients, unless you're going to benefit from that. So in order to maximize valuation, you need to see the full spectrum of those opportunities and allow us to lay out all of them for you with projected cash flows, projected assumptions, good, better, best scenarios, so that when you do make a decision, it's informed and you can be assured that you left no stone unturned. Because there are vast differences between each of the groups, like I kind of hit on just before. Everybody's valuation is going to differ. Every DSO is going to look at your business through a slightly different lens, sometimes a dramatically different lens. If you're a specialty group and 3 of your suitors are within your specialty and are specific to your specialty, and then you've got others that are multi-specialty and another that might be a GP centric, they're all going to look at your business differently and place a very different value, because in each one of their hands, your business is projected to do different things, and that will be reflected in their valuation. The deal structure matters because depending on what you're looking for post close and what you're looking to achieve with a partnership or a sale, how you structure the deal, the types of equity you take, the amount of equity of each type of equity you take, all matters in the total value that you're able to achieve over the life of that transaction, that partnership, that relationship. So you're going to see vastly different deal structures by fully exploring the market as well. The value of the equity is going to be different across all those groups. Josh had mentioned, some of these groups have a great pedigree. Other just hear that there's a lot of money being made in the dental space and they want to throw their hat in the ring. And as a result, you need to be wary of the potential return on equity that you would receive from that group versus some of the others that are available to you. So our job is to make sure that you understand the trade-offs, the value, and the quality of the equity within each one of the groups that we're reviewing. Is there a likely recap at all? Obviously, culture matters for a lot of you. These deals, we always prepare our clients to be involved in the business for 3 to 5 years post-close minimum in most cases. And as a result, the group that you partner with, the culture is going to be incredibly important to you. Do you want them to be hands-on and take a lot of things off your plate and have boots on the ground and people in your office? Or do you want to be left alone largely and partner with a quote unquote invisible DSO? Those cultures are very different across all of them. So again, when you work with us, we have an opportunity to bring the entire spectrum of the market to you. And then what are the resources that each one of these DSOs going to offer you that makes you breathe easier or sleep better at night or maximize the potential of your organization post-close and within the partnership? All of these groups have different muscles and different value propositions, and again, have different visions for your business. So you need to make sure that you're exploring the market so that you can hear everybody out. And maybe there are some people that have ideas for your business that you had never thought of. And those organizations are going to put you in the driver's seat to allow you to achieve those things. So that's our job, is to make sure that we bring every buyer type to the table, and even challenge our clients sometimes when they tell us, for example, if they're an ortho specific group and they tell us, oh, well, I only want to partner with an orthodontic specific DSO. Well, we always challenge them to let us bring a few others to the table, and usually, actually, they're always grateful for that. They don't always go with those options, but they do understand after the fact why we wanted to bring them to the table, because they have an opportunity to look back and say, I left no stone unturned. I fully explored the market. I know the choice that I'm making is the right one for me, and have conviction around it when you get closer to the closing table and the next phase starts to become more realistic. So that's all we had today. Josh, anything else before we part ways here this evening?
I don't think so. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime. Everybody, here's an opportunity for you to reach out to us. We conduct complimentary evaluations for any and all parties that are interested. We love to take phone calls and educate folks on the landscape, and ideally partner with motivated folks that want to explore this space. But we're happy to perform that complimentary evaluation and get the conversation started. Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight. We weren't able to get to the questions in the chat box, but we will be following up with everybody within 24 hours via email to respond to some of those questions. Thank you all very much. Have a great evening.
Good evening.